Welcome back to the deep dive. I actually want to start today by talking directly to you.
Right.
Yes, you. Because if you're tuning into this deep dive, it tells me something very specific about you. It means you're deeply curious.
Yeah, you're the kind of person who's always seeking out multiple perspectives.
Exactly. You're looking for those genuine aha moments that totally reframe how you see the world. But if you're anything like me, you probably want those insights without feeling completely buried under an absolute avalanche of information overload.
Oh, the information fatigue is so real right now.
It's so real. You want the clarity, you want the core insight, and most importantly, you want to know how it actually connects to your own messy day-to-day life. And today, we have a deep dive that's going to deliver exactly that.
It really is. The source material today is just incredible.
We are exploring the human condition, specifically our innate hardwired anxiety, our very strange and highly relative relationship with time, and our natural tendency toward greed. But we're looking at all of this through a truly fascinating ancient lens.
It's a remarkable lens to look through. The text we're examining today offers a psychological profile of humanity that is so startlingly accurate. It literally feels like it could have been written yesterday by a modern behavioral psychologist.
Despite being many centuries old.
Exactly.
So, just to lay the groundwork, the source material we're working from today is a comprehensive, incredibly detailed document titled Life Lessons Surah.pdff.
Right.
For those who might not know, this document breaks down Surah al-Marij, which translates to the ascending stairways. It's a chapter from the Quran, and the document we have takes a highly analytical, very structured approach to extracting practical life lessons from it.
And we really need to establish the methodology behind this source document before we get into the meat of the text.
Yeah, because reading through the notes, the foundation of this analysis is absolutely massive. It's not just one person's casual reflection on a weekend.
Not at all. The author of this document didn't just casually read the chapter, jot down some personal thoughts, and, call it a day. They built this analysis on a highly reliable, meticulously curated foundation of over 150 different classic and modern Sunni texts.
I have to pause on that. Over 150 texts.
Yeah, over 150.
That is a staggering amount of cross-referencing for a single chapter. What is the actual value of pulling from that many different sources? Doesn't that just create a lot of contradictory noise?
You'd think so, but it actually does the exact opposite when curated correctly. It creates a consensus.
Ah, I see.
When you consult 150 different scholars over a span of 1,000 years, you aren't looking for the fringe, weird ideas. You're looking for the absolute core, agreed-upon bedrock interpretations. And the source document is very transparent about its boundaries in this regard.
How so?
It explicitly states that it excluded Shia literature, specifically mentioning works like Tafsir al-Qawmi or al-Mizan.
Now, let me just play devil's advocate for a second here. To a modern listener, excluding a whole branch of literature might sound a bit like bias. Why intentionally leave those out if you're trying to get a totally comprehensive view?
It's a great question, and the source explains this clearly. The purpose of doing that wasn't dismissive or antagonistic. It was a strict methodological choice to maintain a completely consistent theological and historical baseline throughout the analysis.
Okay, that makes sense.
Think of it like a scientific study where you need a control group. If you're trying to extract a cohesive psychological and social framework, mixing fundamentally different theological foundations or different historical chains of narration can muddy the waters.
Yeah.
It leads to contradictory psychological profiles.
So they stuck strictly to the Sunni tradition to keep the analytical lens incredibly sharp and focused.
Exactly.
And when we look at the list of the scholars and texts consulted within that tradition, these aren't just obscure writers. The document lists classical heavyweights like al-Tabari, who is foundational for historical context.
Oh yeah, Tabari is essential.
Right. And al-Qurtubi, who's brilliant on legal and behavioral rulings. Ibn Kathir, al-Baghawi, and Fakhr al-Din-Arazi, who brings this deeply philosophical mind to the text.
Yes, and it doesn't stop in the medieval period either. It pulls in modern perspectives from figures like Maududi, Asadi, and Sayyid Qutbi.
To see how these ancient ideas actually apply to contemporary society.
Precisely. And to ground all of this, to ensure the interpretations aren't just scholars guessing over the centuries, the analysis is backed up by the 6 main hadith books.
Those being the verified sayings and traditions of the Prophet Muhammad.
Right. Including the absolute most rigorously authenticated ones, Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, along with dozens of other early primary collections.
So the big takeaway for you listening right now is that the insights we're about to discuss represent the mainstream, heavily vetted, historically grounded understanding of this text. It's literally a synthesis of over a millennium of human thought distilled into highly practical life lessons.
It's a massive undertaking.
It really is. But before we jump into those lessons, I want to set the tone for how we are approaching this today. We are not here to debate theology, we're not endorsing a specific religion, and we're definitely not here to preach.
No, not at all.
Our goal is to completely impartially unpack the profound psychological, social, and practical life lessons that this source material offers. We're treating this text like a brilliantly complex 1,400-year-old mirror held up to human nature.
Which is exactly what makes it so relevant today.
Exactly. So whether you are listening to this as a devout believer, someone of an entirely different faith, or just a strict analytical secularist, there is something deeply resonant here about how we as a species handle stress, money, time, and society.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's unpack this. The source document categorizes the first section, which covers verses 1 through 7, under the theme of our rush for results versus God's timeline.
It's a remarkably aggressive way to open a chapter, actually. The source points out that the text begins right in the middle of a confrontation.
Right. Verses 1 till 3 describe a questioner.
Yes. A questioner who is sarcastically demanding that God hurry up and bring on the punishment. They are essentially taunting the concept of divine justice.
But who is this questioner actually supposed to be? Is this just a rhetorical metaphor for human doubt, or are we talking about a real historical figure standing in the desert yelling at the sky?
According to the classical scholars like Ibn Kathir and al-Tabari, this was a very real, specific historical moment. They identify this questioner as likely being someone from the powerful Quraysh tribe in Mecca, often pinpointed as a man named Nadr bin al-Harith.
Okay, so a specific guy.
Yes, he was one of the elites, and he was actively, publicly mocking the Prophet Muhammad. His attitude was basically, if this message you're bringing is real, if this unseen moral law actually has tangible consequences, then let's see it. Let's see the punishment right now. Drop it on my head. Prove it.
That is just wild to me. It's the ultimate blinding expression of human arrogance. I demand immediate, tangible proof on my own terms, or else I reject reality.
It's a very human reaction, honestly.
It is. But it makes me wonder, how does the text actually respond to that? Does it just say punishment is coming in a generic way? Because a lot of ancient texts use very vague threats.
This is where the source document gets into a fascinating linguistic deep dive. The text does not use a vague word at all. The Arabic word used to describe this incoming consequence is waqi.
Okay, break that down for me. What does waqi mean, practically speaking?
It doesn't just mean a generic bad event or a vague concept of karma. The linguistic root of waqi paints a terrifyingly specific physical picture. It describes something heavy falling from a great height that permanently glues itself to the target.
Wait, it permanently glues itself, like it tracks them.
Exactly. The analogy the source provides is brilliant. Think of it as a locked-on missile.
Wow.
It means the consequence is not some random, chaotic event you might get lucky and dodge. It is actively tracking the people who arrogantly reject the truth. It's inevitable. It's already in the air.
See, think about how this connects to our modern lives today. How often do you look at the news, or even just your own workplace, and see this exact same arrogance? People or massive institutions acting with absolute, unchecked impunity.
All the time.
They behave unethically, they exploit people, and because the consequence doesn't happen the very next morning at 9 a.m., they assume it will never happen. They mock the very idea of accountability.
And that is the exact psychological trap the text is warning against. Arrogance demands immediate proof. And when the proof is delayed, the arrogance just doubles.
But the lesson the source extracts here is chillingly clear. Arrogance does not shield you from consequences, it actually guarantees them. Human impatience does not dictate the timing of justice.
Just because the missile hasn't landed yet doesn't mean it isn't already locked on and falling.
Which perfectly sets up the pivot in the text. Because if this locked-on missile is falling, why the delay? Why doesn't it just hit immediately and prove the arrogant guy wrong?
Well, the text answers this in verse 4 by completely shifting the perspective. It moves from this petty, impatient human in Mecca to the awe-inspiring scale of the cosmos.
It talks about the angels and the spirit, right?
Yes, which the source identifies as the angel Gabriel. They ascend to God in a day that measures 50,000 years.
50,000 years. For one single day. I have to be honest, as a human who gets annoyed waiting 2 minutes for a microwave to finish, I cannot even fathom the concept of a 50,000-year day. How are we supposed to process that?
We aren't really supposed to be able to comfortably process it, and that's the point.
Hmm.
What's fascinating here is how the modern scholar Modudi interprets this, as noted in the source.
What does Modudi say?
He points out that this verse is deliberately designed to completely shatter our human, localized concept of time. We humans think a century is an incredibly long time. We plan our entire lives, our legacies, in increments of 5, maybe 10 years. But divine plans, cosmic scales of justice, unfold over periods that make human history look like a microscopic blip. A single day in that upper realm is 50 millennia to us.
So when Nader bin al-Harith stands there demanding immediate punishment, he's fundamentally misunderstanding the scale of the universe he lives in.
He's a fruit fly, demanding to understand the lifespan of an oak tree.
That's a great way to put it. But wait, the source document introduces an incredibly complex twist here. It's not just about God's time being long. It introduces the concept of the relativity of time.
Yes, it references a hadith, a recorded tradition from the collection Musnad Ahmad.
And it says that when this verse was first revealed, the prophet's early companions were absolutely terrified by it, and honestly, rightfully so. Imagine being told that Judgment Day, the day you stand trial for everything you've ever done, lasts for 50,000 years. That sounds like a punishment in itself, just the waiting.
It does sound agonizing. But the prophet explained to them something that is a staggering psychological and spiritual concept. He said that for a true believer, that entire 50,000-year day will actually feel shorter than the time it takes to pray a single obligatory daily prayer.
Shorter than a prayer. So we're talking about maybe 5 to 10 minutes of perceived time.
Exactly. Time, in this theological framework, is entirely relative to one's internal spiritual state.
That is wild.
It reminds me of how Einstein famously and jokingly described relativity.
Mm.
An hour sitting next to a pretty girl feels like a minute, but a minute sitting on a hot stove feels like an hour.
Yes.
In the cosmology of this text, the internal state of the human soul literally warps the experience of cosmic time.
That is profound. If you live a life entirely disconnected from higher principles, completely consumed by the material world, then when the illusion of that material world is stripped away and the reckoning comes, it will feel like an absolute agonizing eternity. The psychological weight of facing your own actions without any spiritual grounding stretches time into a 50,000-year nightmare.
But if you are anchored, if you have built a habit of internal peace and connection to the divine, that massive cosmic scale is compressed into a fleeting, peaceful moment.
It's a beautiful juxtaposition. The universe operates on a scale so massive it crushes the human mind, yet the human soul has the capacity to compress that massive scale simply through its internal integrity.
It really is.
But practically speaking, how do you maintain that internal integrity when there is literally a guy standing in front of you mocking you, demanding that a missile fall on his head? It's easy to be peaceful on a mountaintop. It's really hard when you're being publicly humiliated. How does the text say we should deal with the mockers right now?
The source moves to exercise it, verses 5 through 7, which provide the exact prescribed coping mechanism for that moment. The text tells the prophet to exercise beautiful patience. The Arabic term used is sabrun jamil.
Okay, I have to challenge this. Beautiful patience. In a modern context, patience usually just means sitting there and taking it. It sounds a lot like being a doormat. Is the text just telling him to politely accept the abuse? Because that sounds like toxic positivity.
That is the exact opposite of how the classical scholars define sabrun jamil. The source is very clear on this. It is not just passively waiting or being a punching bag. It is grace under intense pressure.
Grace under pressure.
Yes. It means enduring hardship without complaining to others, without seeking pity, and without playing the victim. You don't walk around looking defeated, and you don't engage in the mudslinging.
So it's active. True patience is an active, dignified strength. That is such a powerful takeaway for you as a listener today. Think about it. When you face intense unfairness at work, or deep toxicity in your social circle, or someone actively mocking your values, what is your immediate default reaction?
It's almost always to absorb that negativity.
Yes. To immediately text your friends and complain about it. To adopt a victim mindset and say, why is this happening to me? But Sabrun Jamil says no. You hold your head up. You completely refuse to let their spiritual sickness infect your mood.
You trust the process.
You trust the process, knowing that the cosmic scales of justice are operating on that 50,000-year timeline you can't see, but that they are absolutely flawless. You don't need to win the argument in the moment, you just need to maintain your grace.
That dignified silence in the face of mockery is incredibly powerful because it starves the mocker of the reaction they desperately want.
Exactly.
But the source document doesn't let us stay in that quiet, peaceful state for long. The text takes a very sharp, very dark turn in verses 8 through 18. We move into what the source describes as when the world unravels. We enter the territory of physical and social collapse.
And the apocalyptic imagery in verses 8 through 14 is intense. The source describes the verses painting a picture of the sky boiling like dirty oil. Imagine looking up and seeing the atmosphere, the very air we breathe, turning into this viscous, churning, filthy liquid.
It's a terrifying visual.
And the mountains, these massive, immovable symbols of permanence on Earth, are described as drifting away like weightless, plucked wool. The fundamental physical laws of the universe just completely disintegrate.
It is terrifying visual imagery, but the expert consensus in the source document points out something deeply profound here. The physical destruction of the universe, the boiling sky, the floating mountains, is actually secondary.
Secondary to what?
It's just the backdrop for the real horror described in the text, which is the complete, absolute dissolution of human bonds.
Right, the social collapse. And the scenario the text lays out is incredibly bleak. It says that on that day, you will see your absolute best friend, the person you trusted more than anyone in the world, and you won't even ask how they're doing.
And it escalates rapidly from there. The source explains that the instinct for self-preservation in the face of absolute moral accountability induces such an overwhelming panic that loved ones are not just ignored, they are weaponized.
Weaponized.
The sinner becomes so utterly desperate to escape the consequences of their actions that they gladly offer to ransom everyone they have ever loved.
I have to pause here because this is one of the darkest concepts in the whole document. It says they will offer their own children, their spouse, their brother, their extended family. The text literally says they would offer everyone on Earth as a ransom just to save themselves. Is human nature really that dark? Would a mother really throw her child into the fire to save herself?
It is a brutal concept to grapple with, but the psychological point the scholars extract here is about the blinding terror of the ego when all earthly illusions are stripped away.
The illusions of society.
Right. In this life, we define ourselves by our relationships and our tribal loyalties. But the text argues that when you are suddenly faced with the raw, undeniable reality of ultimate justice, the terror is so absolute that all of those social constructs evaporate instantly. The ego's drive to survive overrides every single biological and emotional bond.
The source draws a really uncomfortable direct line from this apocalyptic scenario to our daily grind. We spend our entire lives engaging in nepotism, networking, building wealth strictly for our families, trying to impress our social circles. We often compromise our own morals, we lie, we cheat, we step on others just to protect our tribe or to secure a legacy for our kids.
Exactly. And the lesson the source extracts is that in the end, all of these things, social status, family ties, tribal loyalty, are completely bankrupt currencies. When the final audit of your soul happens, none of it matters.
The text is warning you that you cannot hide behind your powerful family or your elite social network. You must prioritize your personal moral responsibility over blind loyalty to your tribe, because the instinct for self-preservation will eventually override all of that earthly loyalty anyway.
That brings us to the ultimate rejection. That desperate, horrifying willingness to throw your own children into the fire to save yourself. It doesn't even work. God completely rejects that desperate ransom offer.
Which introduces the specific punishment described in verses 15 through 18. And here's where it gets really interesting, bordering on surreal. The punishment is a specific level of hell called laza. Now, the source translates laza as a fierce, peeling flame. But it's not just a dumb physical fire, is it?
No, it's not. And this is where the classical exegesis is fascinating. The text describes this fire as almost sentient. It has an awareness. It actively calls out to specific people.
Wait, it literally has a voice? It hunts people.
Linguistically, it is personified as an angry, hungry entity that actively searches the crowd for specific psychological profiles. The source explains that this sentient fire, laza, specifically calls out to people who committed two very distinct crimes during their earthly lives. First, those who turned their backs on the truth, and second, those who hoarded their wealth.
I want to really dig into that pairing, because it seems odd at first glance. Rejecting the truth is a spiritual or intellectual crime. You hear a divine message and you arrogantly turn away. But hoarding wealth is an economic crime, a social crime. Why does this ancient text treat them as two sides of the exact same coin, hunted by the exact same sentient fire?
If we connect this to the bigger picture established by the 150 scholars consulted, the underlying philosophy is that materialism is quite literally a spiritual disease. In this theological framework, wealth is never inherently yours.
It's a tool.
It is a tool designed to circulate. It is meant to flow through society, alleviating hardship and testing the generosity of the one currently holding it. When you lock that wealth away purely out of greed, when you refuse to help people in need, you aren't just making a selfish economic choice, you are creating a spiritual vacuum.
You're hoarding.
You are expressing an arrogant disbelief in God's ability to provide for you tomorrow, so you hoard everything today.
You are attracted to the material, so you attract a material destruction. The source puts it so profoundly. When you lock it away out of greed, it becomes the exact thing that ruins you. The hoarding itself is what summons the sentient fire. It's as if the universe is saying, you wanted to hold on to everything tightly, you wanted to grip the world in your fists, so now this peeling flame is going to hold tightly onto you.
It's a terrifying validation of the idea that whatever you worship on earth will become the instrument of your own destruction if it isn't aligned with higher moral principles.
And that raises a crucial question that the scholars in the source document pivot to next. Why do we do it? Why do we hoard? Why do we panic? This leads perfectly into the next section covering verses 19 through 21. After the massive cosmic scales, the boiling skies, and the sentient hunting fires, the text suddenly zooms all the way in. It gets incredibly intimate and provides a remarkably modern psychological profile of the human condition.
This is hands down my favorite part of the entire analysis.
Mine too. Right in the middle of this intense, cosmic, apocalyptic poetry, we get a profound diagnosis of everyday human anxiety. The text states that human beings are created halua. The source breaks down this Arabic word to mean deeply anxious, impatient, and restless.
And this is where the classical scholar Al-Qurtubi offers an interpretation that completely upends how most people think about religion and sin.
Let's hear it.
The source highlights Al-Qurtubi's explanation that this innate anxiety, this halua, is not a punishment from God. It is not a flaw in your character or a sin that you acquired because you did something wrong. It is the baseline code of human nature. You were built this way on purpose. It is the ultimate test.
Think about how deeply validating that is. I really want you, the listener, to absorb this. How often do you feel completely restless? You probably constantly battle this low-grade anxiety about your career trajectory, your bank account, your relationships, your future. We spend billions of dollars on self-help books, wellness retreats, and therapies trying to cure this anxiety.
And worse, we often feel guilty that we have it in the first place.
Exactly, as if we are somehow spiritually or mentally broken because we can't just be purely peaceful all the time. But this ancient text is looking right at you and saying, no, you aren't broken. You are manufactured with a restless engine. That is the baseline code of the human operating system.
It completely validates modern anxiety and the scarcity mindset. You aren't failing at life by feeling anxious. You are simply experiencing the baseline human condition. And the text goes further by explaining how this baseline halua manifests in two distinct opposing faces, depending entirely on our external circumstances. The first face is jazua.
Let's unpack jazua. The source explains that this is how our baseline anxiety shows up when things go bad. When we face adversity, financial loss, sickness, or a career setback, we don't just feel sad. We panic. We complain loudly to everyone around us. We play the victim.
We lose all hope.
We instantly assume that the darkness we are in right now will last forever. We exhibit zero emotional resilience.
And then there's the second face, the flip side of the coin, which is manalua. This is how our anxiety manifests when things actually go well. Now, logically, you would think that when we achieve success, when we finally get the promotion or the big paycheck, we would relax. We would feel safe.
Oh, we don't.
But the source points out that under the influence of manua, when we get money and security, we actually become incredibly greedy and tight-fisted. We stop sharing. Why? Because the anxiety hasn't left. It just changed shape. We are suddenly terrified of losing what we have just gained.
It is the scarcity mindset in its absolute purest form. It is brilliant. When we are poor, we panic that we don't have enough. When we are rich, we panic that we will lose what we have. It is an endless, exhausting cycle of misery driven by this underlying engine of halua.
It's exhausting.
And I think the lesson the source drives home here is so necessary for modern listeners. Step one to fixing a base instinct is simply acknowledging that it is hardwired into us. You cannot fix a problem if you are busy denying it exists or feeling ashamed of it. You have to look in the mirror and say, I am naturally anxious, I am highly prone to panic when things go wrong, and I am naturally greedy when things go right. That is my default setting.
Only then, once the denial is gone, can you begin the hard work of overriding the programming.
Which naturally raises the ultimate million-dollar question. If we are fundamentally wired for panic and greed, if the deck is stacked against us by our own nature, how on earth do we fix it? How do we override that baseline programming?
And the source document provides the explicit answer by deeply analyzing verses 22 through 35, which outline what the author categorizes as the 8 habits of the ascended soul.
Right. The text offers an 8-step cure to the scarcity mindset. It states that everyone is stuck in that endless, miserable cycle of anxiety and greed, except a specific group of people it calls the Muselin. Literally translated, it means those who pray. But the source is very quick to point out that it's not just about the physical, ritual act of prayer.
The text unpacks 8 specific traits that these people embody, and each one is a deliberate, calculated countermeasure against our baseline flaws. We really need to take our time and walk through these 8 traits carefully because the psychological mechanics behind them are fascinating.
Let's do it. Walk us through them.
The first trait is consistency. The text says they are daimon constant in their prayers.
Now, why is consistency trait number 1? Why not start with something grand, like absolute faith or massive charity?
Because consistency is the ultimate test of discipline over emotion. The source emphasizes that daimon means showing up every single day, not just when you feel emotional, motivated, or spiritual. You don't just pray when you are in a crisis and need a massive favor from the universe. And you don't just pray when you are on a mountaintop feeling deeply connected to nature.
You do it on the boring, mundane Tuesday mornings when you are tired, stressed, and running late.
Exactly. It is the discipline of routine, deliberately overriding the chaos of human emotion. Motivation is fleeting, habit is the anchor.
Okay, moving to the second trait. This one directly attacks the manua, that natural greed and fear of loss we just talked about. The text says these people share their money correctly, but the phrasing here is absolutely critical. The source notes that they recognize that the poor have a known right to a portion of their wealth. I love the psychological shift the source highlights here because it completely contradicts how we view charity today.
It absolutely does. How do we view charity today?
In our modern society, giving to charity is almost always framed as a massive favor. If a billionaire gives away a fraction of a percent of their wealth, we expect them to get a plaque, a massive tax write-off, a hospital wing named after them, and a round of applause. We treat them like saviors. But the text frames it entirely differently. It says that a specific percentage of your money was never ever yours to begin with. God put it in your bank account as a test, but it legally and spiritually belongs to the poor.
Exactly. So when you give it to them, you are not being incredibly generous or noble. You are simply returning what already belongs to them. You are paying a debt.
It completely destroys the ego and arrogance of wealth. You can't be smug about paying a bill that was due.
It reframes charity from an act of ego to an act of basic justice. Now, moving on to the third trait. They keep the end in mind. They possess a genuine, unwavering belief in Judgment Day.
Now, let's play devil's advocate again. Believing in Judgment Day is great for theology, but how does that actually help you on a random Wednesday when your car breaks down and you're late for a meeting? How does that cure the halua anxiety?
Because it provides the ultimate, unbreakable long-term vision. When you genuinely believe that every single atom of your actions and every hardship you endure will be weighed on a cosmic scale, it completely recontextualizes your present moment. It stops you from panicking over short-term earthly problems. The stock market crashing, or someone cutting you off in traffic, or a project failing at work loses its power to induce that Jazua panic. Why? Because your mental horizon is no longer fixed on Friday's paycheck. It is focused on a timeline that spans millions of years. The immediate crisis is reduced to a microscopic bump in the road.
That brings us to the fourth trait, which the source describes as a delicate psychological balancing act. The text says they balance fear and hope. They deeply fear God's justice. They understand the terrifying reality of that sentient fire, Laza. But they also love the divine and hope for mercy. Why is this balance so crucial? Isn't living in fear toxic?
Living purely in fear is toxic, yes, because it leads to despair. But living purely in hope is equally dangerous because it leads to spiritual entitlement. The source explains that this balance specifically prevents arrogance. If you only have hope, you get comfortable. You think, I've checked all the boxes, I'm perfectly safe, God is merciful, so my minor sins don't matter, I'm guaranteed heaven. But if you only have fear, you give up, thinking, I'm doomed anyway. By balancing the two, they walk a tightrope of humility. They're constantly striving, constantly improving, but never, ever taking their ultimate salvation for granted.
Trait number 5 is going to sound very countercultural today. It's about respecting boundaries, specifically regarding chastity and keeping intimate lives strictly within lawful marriages.
Yes, and the source doesn't shy away from this. Yeah. In a modern world driven entirely by immediate gratification, the complete breakdown of social boundaries, and the commodification of intimacy, this trait is a massive psychological anchor.
A psychological anchor.
Maintaining absolute discipline over one's most powerful, primal, biological desires is presented as a core component of spiritual ascension. If you cannot control your most basic urges, you cannot hope to control your complex anxieties.
Which links to the 6th trait, trustworthiness. They keep their promises and fiercely protect whatever people entrust to them, whether that's money, a secret, or a responsibility. But isn't that just basic human decency? Why is it elevated to an ascended soul trait?
Because true trustworthiness is incredibly rare, especially when there is money or power on the line. The source pulls in a very powerful piece of context here, noting a stark warning from the Prophet Muhammad. He stated that breaking trusts is a clear, undeniable sign of hypocrisy.
Wow.
It doesn't matter how outwardly religious you look. If you pray 5 times a day but you steal from your business partners, or you spill secrets you swore to keep, or you embezzle funds, your spiritual practice is a complete facade. The internal faith must manifest as external reliability.
And that external reliability is tested even further in the 7th trait, telling the truth. The text says they stand firm in their testimonies. They refuse to lie, spin, or hide evidence to protect their own interests or the interests of their tribe. But let's be real, standing firm in testimony can have massive social costs. What if telling the truth gets your brother sent to prison? What if it costs you your career?
That is exactly why it is trait number 7. Think back to the horrifying social collapse we discussed in Section 2, where people would ransom their own families to save themselves. Standing firm in a difficult testimony means you are practicing that exact moral courage right now before the apocalypse. Even if telling the truth costs you your job, your social standing, or your relationships, you refuse to corrupt reality for earthly gain. You value the cosmic truth over your tribal loyalty.
Wow. And finally, the 8th trait. The list ends by stating that they guard their prayers. The Arabic word is yuhafizun. Now wait, trait number 1 was also about prayer. Are we just repeating ourselves? What is the difference between dabaymun, consistency, and yuhafizun, guarding?
It is a brilliant distinction. The source contrasts them perfectly. The first trait, consistency, was just about showing up, quantity. The 8th trait is entirely about protecting the quality of that act. Guarding the prayer means focusing on the exact timing, the mental presence, the deep humility of the act. You aren't just going through the physical motions while thinking about your grocery list. You are actively guarding that intimate spiritual connection from being diluted by worldly distraction.
So we have these 8 highly specific traits. Let's review them quickly. Consistency in showing up, sharing wealth as a mandatory right, long-term cosmic vision, balancing fear and hope, sexual discipline, absolute trustworthiness, unshakable honesty and testimony, and guarding the deep quality of the spiritual connection. Yeah. So what does this all mean? When you look at the structure of this list, the source points out a brilliant, deliberate architectural design by the author of the text. The list starts with prayer merely showing up, and it ends with prayer protecting its quality. Prayer acts as the bookends for everything else.
It's what we could call the anchor effect. The analysis in the source document suggests that prayer is the ultimate stabilizing force. When that vertical connection to the divine is stable, consistent, and high quality, all of the incredibly difficult moral behaviors sandwiched in the middle, the terrifying honesty, the massive charity, the strict fidelity, the trustworthiness, they begin to naturally fall into place.
It creates a self-sustaining habit loop. You connect to the divine, which gives you the psychological strength to be radically honest and generous, which in turn deepens your purity and connection to the divine, making your next prayer even higher quality. The source states very clearly doing these 8 things guarantees you a spot of honor in paradise.
It is the literal practical cure for the halua, that baseline anxiety and greed we are all suffering from.
But of course, as we know, not everyone chooses to adopt these habits. The path is laid out, but many reject it. And the source document notes that in verses 36 through 44, the Surah turns its attention back to the people who actively mock this entire framework. We return to the theme of arrogance and the ultimate wake-up call. Yes, we are back with the mockers from the very beginning of the chapter, the Nadr bin al-Hariths of the world. The text describes how they used to sit in little cliques. The Arabic word used is "isen," gathering around the prophet in these smug, elitist little groups just to make fun of him and his message.
The source highlights the incredibly bizarre, almost delusional logic these cliques operated under. Despite actively mocking the concept of a moral universe, despite rejecting the idea of a judgment day, they held this deeply entitled, unshakable belief that if paradise actually turned out to be real, they would automatically get VIP access to it,
Wait, why? Why would they think they get into a heaven they don't even believe in?
simply because they were wealthy, powerful, and influential on Earth. Their logic was, God obviously loves us because he made us rich here, so naturally, he will make us rich in the next life too.
It is the ultimate illusion of entitlement. And the source really connects this deeply to how we think today. Think about it. How often do we unconsciously conflate earthly success with moral superiority? If someone is a billionaire or a famous celebrity or a powerful politician, we often assume they must possess some deeper wisdom, some inherent rightness. We defer to them, we listen to their advice, buy their books, and assume their wealth is proof of their value in human beings.
But the lesson the source extracts is brutal and entirely necessary. Spiritual success cannot be inherited through a bloodline, and it absolutely cannot be purchased with a massive bank account. You cannot actively reject the truth, exploit the poor, hoard your wealth, and indulge your ego, and then expect the rewards of the righteous simply because you had a high status in the temporary material world. The universe does not care about your stock portfolio.
Which brings us to the climax of the text, verses 40 through 44. God utterly shuts down this arrogant entitlement. The text delivers a massive oath, sworn by God's absolute power over the entire universe, referring to himself as the Lord of the East and the West, stating that he could easily, effortlessly wipe these arrogant mockers completely out of existence and replace them with a much better, more righteous generation. They are not essential to the universe. Their wealth does not make them irreplaceable. They are entirely expendable in the grand scheme of things.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, look at the final instruction given to the prophet in these verses. God tells him to just leave them be. Let them indulge in their vain talk and their earthly games. Don't stress over trying to convince people who are absolutely committed to their own arrogance. You've delivered the message. Now step back. Let reality run its course.
Let reality run its course. That is a terrifying phrase when you think about the locked-on missile from verse 1, because the final picture the source paints from these concluding verses is incredibly grim. It describes the inevitable, inescapable conclusion. These same arrogant, wealthy mockers scrambling out of their graves on the day of judgment in a frantic, terrifying rush. Their eyes, which used to look down on everyone from their smug little cliques, are now cast down in total, crushing humiliation and shame. The consequence they mockingly demanded way back in verse 1 has finally, undeniably arrived.
The takeaway from the source document is uncompromising. Letting wealth and social status distract you from the reality of your mortality is a catastrophic eternal mistake. The frantic chasing of worldly goals at the strict expense of moral development and the 8 habits ultimately leads to absolute spiritual bankruptcy. Arrogance today equals deep, inescapable humiliation tomorrow.
As we synthesize everything we've unpacked today from this incredible source document, the massive scale of this ancient text really comes into sharp focus. It is a masterpiece of perspective. It perfectly seamlessly ties the awe-inspiring, terrifying scale of the cosmos, where days last 50,000 years, where skies boil like dirty oil, and where sentient fires actively hunt for the greedy. It ties all of that massive cosmic weight directly to our quiet, personal, mundane, daily struggles.
It takes the grand architecture of reality and maps it precisely onto the very human experiences of anxiety, restlessness, and the temptation to panic or hoard. It shows us that the cosmic and the psychological are not separate, they are deeply interconnected. How you treat your money today impacts where you stand in a 50,000-year timeline tomorrow.
The source outlines 2 very distinct paths for you. You can spend your life running horizontally. You can chase empty worldly distractions. You can cling desperately to your little cliques and social networks. You can hoard your wealth, driven entirely by that baseline anxiety, running faster and faster on the endless treadmill of materialism until you are isolated, exhausted, and ultimately ruined when the reality of time catches up with you.
Or you can choose the vertical climb, the ascending stairways that the chapter is named after. You can rise above your base instincts by actively, painstakingly building the anchors of the Muzellen. You establish a consistent connection to a higher power. You treat your wealth as a tool for justice rather than a trophy. You guard your honesty and your promises, and you build real, lasting dignity and peace.
It's the ultimate choice between being consumed by the world or ascending above it. But before we sign off, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought. It's a concept extrapolated from everything we've discussed today, specifically regarding that psychological profile of halua, our baseline hardwired anxiety. If this ancient text is right and your deep baseline anxiety, that pit in your stomach when things go wrong, or that fear of losing what you have isn't a flaw in your character but rather a deliberate feature, an engine designed specifically to test what you anchor yourself to, how does acknowledging that immediately change the way you react to your very next problem?
It changes everything.
Think about the very next minor inconvenience you face today, or the next unexpected financial windfall you receive. If your anxiety is just the engine, neutral in its power, what are you letting it drive you toward? Are you letting it drive you toward panic, victimhood, and greed? Or are you using that restless, nervous energy to fuel your vertical climb? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the human condition. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep ascending.